The presenting sponsor of Moon Tower Soccer is FVF Law.
To find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm, you can visit fvf.law.
Hello friends, and thanks for listening to Moon Tower Soccer. Today's show, we're going to review the Tigres match and some other Austin FC news from this week. We'll also preview the Seattle Sounders match on Thursday with Jeremiah Oshan from SB Nation and Sounder at Heart. My name is Landon Cottom. I'm joined as always by Mr. Jeremiah Bentley.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremiah Bentley and have a reason for once to make sure my last name is included in the show because you have multiple Jeremiahs this week.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do during this interview, but we'll figure it out. So, Jeremiah, I wanted to start this week out with a little quiz, and I'm going to put you on the spot because you didn't know we were doing this until a couple of minutes ago, and you don't even know what the questions are. And so I was just kind of flipping through team stats and kind of seeing who were Austin FC's leaders in certain stats. And so I'm just going to go through some of these categories and see if you can guess who are leaders, or in some cases, maybe who's second or third in some of these stats. So,
okay, can we start with saves?
Yeah, who has the most saves?
Brad Stuver.
I was going to say who has second most, but nobody else has.
He has all of them. Yeah.
Tarbell made a couple in the Tigres match, but those aren't official. So, all right. So first stat I wanted to look at is most minutes played, which I think the number one answer is easy, right? But
that's Stuver's got to be the number one answer, correct?
Yeah. Who is number two?
Cecilio Dominguez.
That's correct. Yeah, Cecilio Dominguez, followed by Matt Beasler, and then Jean Kolmanich is not far behind him.
Which for Kolmanich is interesting because he wasn't originally our starter, right? He's got the whole match plus where he didn't play.
Yeah. The next one I thought was interesting is key passes. So key passes it's a pass that leads to a shot that does not lead to a goal. So it's like a would-be assist. If they had finished it, it would be an assist. So who is Austin FC's leader in key passes?
This I have no idea. So I'm going to go with Tomas Pochettino.
It's actually Jean Kolmanich again.
Wow.
Yeah, 19 key passes for Jean. Number two is Diego Fagundes with 17, Cecilio with 15, Pochettino with 13.
Wow, go Jean.
Yeah, I thought that one was impressive. Let's look at, these are interesting stats here. So fouls suffered. Which Austin FC player has been fouled the most this season?
Cecilio Dominguez.
That's correct.
All
23
right.
fouls. Pochettino and Ring are tied for second with 14. Fouls committed. Who has committed the most fouls?
I feel like Alex Ring.
He is tied for someone else. Who is he tied with?
I mean, I feel like Pereira makes a lot of fouls, but he hasn't played a lot. Is it really?
That's right.
Oh,
It's Pereira.
He's very efficient.
Yeah. Maybe makes this next one a little bit too easy, but who has the most yellow cards?
Danny Pereira?
Danny Pereira has 4 yellow cards. Johan Romagna has 3 yellow cards. Each of them with Pereira has 538 minutes played. Johan has 585 minutes, so about half as many minutes, less than half as some of these other guys, but with leading the team in yellow cards so far. So I believe if Pereira gets one more, he's going to be suspended for a match. Isn't that right? Is it 5?
I think it's
5 yellows.
Yeah, it is 5 because somebody just hit that this week in the game I was watching. They got their 5th. Yep.
Yeah. So it was I think Javier Arriaga, which we'll talk about with Jeremiah Oshan. I think he just got his 5th yellow card of the season, but we'll talk to Jeremiah Oshan about that whenever we pull him on. Let's see. Let's do one more. So defensively, interceptions. Who is leading the team leading the team in interceptions?
Julio Cascante.
Julio Cascante is in 3rd place.
Oh. Then Alex Ring.
Alex Ring's in 2nd place. 1st place, Matt Beasler.
Matt Beasler. Okay.
Yeah. He's kind of the king of, not the fastest player, getting up there in age, but seems to always be in the right spot at the right time. So getting that stat for sure. There was one more. Let's look at this one as well. So going to go into passing stats here. So they have it separated into number of passes. So like passes completed. I feel like this one, the first three, who are the top three?
So Ring's got to be one of them.
Yeah.
Beasler's one of them.
Mm-hmm. And who does Beasler pass it to half the time?
Well, his partner.
Yeah, it's Julio Cascante.
Cascante, yeah.
So those three are the top three, but they have it split up into passes in the opponent's half versus passes in your own half. So passes in the opponent's half, Alex Ring is also the leader there, which makes sense. He's the one crossing that midfield line a lot of times with the ball. Who's number 2 in that stat? Who has the second most passes in the opposition half?
I'm going to guess our man Diego.
You're right, Diego Fagundes.
Oh man, wow.
you're on fire, Jeremiah.
I did way better than I expected.
You killed that.
Yeah,
and the goal of this exercise was not to put you on the spot by any means, but you did great in that. So congratulations. I'll have to think of a prize for you.
I'll take the rest of the show off. Thank you.
All right, let's jump into this Tigres match from last Tuesday. It was Tuesday, wasn't it? Which I don't know about you, but that was like too early in the week for me. I've kind of been enjoying these midweek games, like these Wednesdays and Thursdays. It breaks up the week, gives you something to look forward to midweek. This Tuesday one was too early. I felt like the weekend should have arrived much sooner after this game.
Yeah, it did, and then it kind of threw off like it threw off our schedule because then our show came out the day of the match. But I think like the press conference schedule is a little off, and it was just a different kind of week, and then it left this huge gap without an Austin FC match too, which I did not love. It's I didn't realize how quickly I would get used to having a game every few days and not enjoy having the big break. Yeah,
for sure. So we're not going to spend a ton of time. I think most people who listen to this show will understand that from a soccer perspective, this game does not really mean much. But we'll go through some other interesting points of the game and cover the game real quick here. So there's a few early chances from Fagundes and Pochettino early on. I don't remember what minute the first goal was, like 20 something, or maybe was it earlier than that?
It was probably about right. It wasn't super early because I just rewatched it like yesterday, and I kind of forgot about our early chances. And then it was a bit before the first goal happened against us.
Yeah, so that came off of a set piece. Romagna probably should have done better on this goal. I was watching it back, and it did take a quick deflection that kind of led to him being wrong-footed, but I still feel like he should have maybe been a little bit tighter to Reyes on that one. Then in the 64th minute, Rodney Redes ties it up 1-1. And at that point, I was like, whoa, maybe we could get something out of this game. And that was a really nice goal by Rodney, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was a banger, as they say. And the assist on that one was from Owen Wolff, correct?
Yeah, 16 years old. So Owen Wolff receives it midfield, plays it to Rodney Redes, who had kind of dropped in from the wing, and then Rodney takes it from there, right? He dribbles one guy. As another guy's approaching, he hits it from, it was probably like 25 yards, something like that, maybe a little under that, but hits it really hard right inside the left-hand post. It was a really nice strike. I don't think that Rodney had a great game, but that play alone was really, really nice. And I'm kind of hoping that the confidence that a play like that will give him, he can kind of carry that forward and maybe turn it into some better performances, because he looked really good in preseason. And I thought that I had been wrong about him just based on what we saw in preseason. Gets a little injury right before the season starts. And Wolff has said that he kind of thinks that injury was the cause of Rodney's performances after that, but hopefully he can take the confidence from that goal and carry it forward. I thought one of the nicest moments for Austin FC out of the match was in the 68th minute. So Tarbell, we're kind of playing it out of the back. Tarbell hits a driven ball to the center of the pitch to Pochettino. I think it bounced once, and it was like a little over waist high. Pochettino kind of jumps in the air, sticks his right foot out and kind of like claws the ball back behind him with his right foot, spins the other way, and then carries the ball forward and kind of goes past, I think 2 guys were on him there, and goes past 2 guys with that little move, which was really, really nice from him. He turns, plays a through ball to Manny Perez, who gets the ball into the box. There's maybe a penalty shout on that. I don't think it should have been a penalty on the second watch, but yeah, it ends up coming to nothing really there. I think a proper striker, like a real striker on the end of that, at least gets a shot off. There's defenders closing him in real tight, and he was going to have to act really fast either way. But I think a real striker gets a shot on frame there, if not scores a goal. So that was really good from Pochettino there. Tigres ends up scoring 2 really nice goals later on in the game to make it 3-1, which I think was a fair score in the end. They did not embarrass Austin by any means, which with all of the injuries coming to this game, I kind of thought could be a possibility. Austin was an already thin roster playing their B team essentially. And I thought it could have gotten ugly, but Austin was in this for most of the game until those last couple of goals went in. So overall, I thought it was a pretty good performance from the players that went out. Some individual performances. Who are some of the players that stood out to you, Jeremiah?
Well, I think Mane had some good moments. He had a shot. He had a pretty decent chance late. 82nd minute or something. He had a shot that got saved. He ran a lot. He seemed to cause a lot of trouble. He was kind of what we think out of him. He was, he would have been better if he was in for 20 minutes, near the end. But yeah, I think he had a pretty decent outing.
Yeah, he did quite a few good things. I still think with both him and Rodney that for every one good thing they did 2 either just like nothing things or bad things. And so I still don't know that either of those guys are net positives for the team, but it was good to see them shine a little bit, even if it was for brief moments there. What about McKenzie Gaines, the trialist? So Austin FC fans watching this game would have seen a name on the roster who is not actually on the roster, which is McKenzie Gaines. He's 23 years old, I believe. He just finished a contract in Germany and I guess just came back home to Austin. He came out of the Lone Star Academy, went straight into youth teams in Germany after that. And so, yeah, it was kind of a surprise to see him there. I don't think anybody knew he was on trial. I hadn't seen that anywhere or heard that anywhere. But he got, I think, only like 5 or 6 minutes. Did we see enough of him to even get an idea of how good he was?
I don't know that we did. I just think he's the kind of guy that we should have around, right? Like we're missing just sort of league average depth. And, he seems like he's a forward, right? So that's a position of need for sure. So, I mean, I'd like to keep him around and kind of see what he can do and see if he can get a little action. I think he's maybe a Manny Perez type where you don't get a ton out of him, but they're so thin. They got to have players.
So I was looking at roster spots, and I think you might have a better grasp of this than I do, but we don't have many roster spots left. And I think the spot that he could potentially fall into would be essentially the last non-senior roster spot that we have to fill.
I believe that's right. Because there's there's rules for each one, right? Like 21 through 24 means something, and then 25 through 28 means something, and then 29 and 30. And I think we have one 25 through 28 spot left, which it seems like he would fill.
Yeah, it's like if they're cheap and below the age of 24 or 25 or something like that, which I believe he would probably be cheap and is 23 years old. So he could slot in there. Would we rather see some defensive depth with that piece there?
Well, it depends upon how do you feel about your man Freddie Kleeman, who got to see some action too? Because he's feeling
Freddie looked all right. Yeah, I was pleased with his performance. I mean, he didn't play good enough to for me to think he should be getting a ton of minutes, but he looked competent enough to be on the bench and to get thrown into a game in a pinch. So, yeah, I thought Freddie looked okay.
And so for me, I think if you look at Freddie, and Aiden Stanley's been pretty decent with the minutes he's gotten. If you take those guys, assume Lima comes back, like I think we've got just enough depth on the back line that we could use more depth still at forward.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking we needed maybe one more guy who could play both center back and fullback, but Aiden Stanley is that guy, right? Like Aiden Stanley against Tigres played both left back and right back at points in the game. And then I believe did he move into center back in one of the most recent games?
I don't know if he played center mid against Minnesota. I don't know.
Maybe I made that up, too? But I think he played some center back in college in any case. But maybe Aiden Stanley is that guy. So with Freddie Kleeman and Aiden Stanley, maybe we are set. And we're gonna have, I believe, in the post game press conference after this Tigres game, Wolff said that Lima should be back in 2 or 3 weeks. So maybe with those guys, the back line is set. What about, we mentioned Owen Wolff briefly earlier. What did you think about Owen Wolff?
I mean, he got the assist. I don't think he looked lost. He was 16, right? I mean, he looked like a child. Physically, he looked like a child out there, but he didn't look completely over his head. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, looked great for a 16-year-old. Like, if you throw in a 16-year-old against Liga MX's competition, I think he did about as well as you could ever hope for.
Yeah, well, what'd you think about Tarbell with his first performance?
I think Tarbell was okay. I think we learned why Brad Stuver is the starter. Tarbell is a fine shot stopper. I think I didn't see anything that made me think that he was just a lot worse than Bradley Stuver at just like the normal goalkeeping parts of being a goalkeeper. But in his distribution, it looked like it was a major step down from what Stuver is able to do. Just kind of being that calming presence in the back, playing clean passes. There was one moment where we almost gave up a goal. I think it was in the first half, but he plays or kind of scuffs a pass, kind of switching the ball on that back line there, and it almost leads to a goal for Tigres. But I think you've heard Josh Wolff and Claudio Reyna talk about the calmness that Stuver brings, and that's the first thing they say when they ask like why, like what does Stuver bring? Why was he chosen as the starter? And I think you saw it in this game against Tigres, and probably unfair against Tarbell because he hasn't been playing a lot lately, but you can see a difference there between those two keepers in this game.
So this is going to be a weird thing that I thought I observed, but apparently it's not true. Tarbell seems really tall. Did you feel like, I feel like he's really tall and really long arm, but actually I went and looked and he's the same size as Brad Stuver. So I don't know why.
I would have guessed maybe he's a little shorter than Stuver.
Yeah, I don't know. They're both 6'3", according to Wikipedia.
He's like a little beefier than Stuver. So maybe
he's that.
Stuver just looks longer because he's kind of skinny.
Yeah, I don't know, but that was my observation on the game. It's like I felt like his arms were really long. Because there was a couple of times when he like didn't quite cleanly save a ball and kind of went up high, and he had like a big stretch.
I think I saw maybe only one tweet about like hinting at nepotism from Wolff playing his son in this game. Do you think there's any merit to that at all?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit true, right? It's a little bit true in the sense of the familiarity. Like, would any other 16-year-old be around? I mean, he's obviously qualified, and he's like, he doesn't have a spot at our academy, and he doesn't really have anywhere else to play, so it makes sense that he's training with the team. But, you know, if he was the best 16-year-old at Vandergrift High School, I mean, I don't think he would have been on the field.
Yeah, but I think that's less to do with him being Josh Wolff's son and more to do with what you just said, the fact that he was around. Like, he has been training with the first team. They haven't signed him. Like, I don't think Josh Wolff has any any delusions that Owen Wolff is going to be a starter for this team anytime soon, or even be on the roster anytime soon. But I think we have so many injuries. The roster was so thin. Cecilio sat this game. Ring sat this game. Gallagher is out. The normal list of long-term injuries was still there. And so we needed to rest players in this game, but didn't really have the depth to do it. And mainly in the midfield. Like, I didn't know how we were going to have enough players to play a midfield at all, much less make any subs. And so by bringing in Owen Wolff, boom, there's a midfielder you can give a chunk of minutes to and take some stress off of your starters. And so I honestly think that's all it was. That I don't know that Wolff is trying to sneak his son into the team or anything. I think it was just like, we need somebody to eat some minutes. Who's around that can do it? Oh, and you're here. You do it.
And he looked competent. He looked good enough at it that it's not like, well, like you said, he's not taking minutes away from somebody else that's sitting around and not there, you know.
Right, and he played in preseason games as well and looked perfectly competent in those games. And so if we hadn't seen those preseason games, it might make me think there's maybe a little bit more nepotism in it, but he looked perfectly fine in those preseason games. So I've got no problem for it. I was frankly thrilled to see his name on the roster just because we need somebody to play. We couldn't play the same guys who've been playing all these minutes right now. So one thing about Owen Wolff, I've been very curious what they're going to do with him. So he is 16 years old. Austin FC is going to have a U17 team this fall. So right now we've got U13, U14, U15. They're going to be adding a U12 team, and then they'll add a U17 team. So they're going to take the current U15 team, bring in some guys from the older year, just maybe probably from local academies, bring those guys in to create this U17 team. And I was kind of thinking like maybe Wolff will play on that team, but like maybe the level's a little bit too low for him at this point. He's like maybe too good to be playing on the U17s, but not quite good enough to be on the first team. We're not going to have a U19 team. But then I started looking into the rules, and when Owen Wolff was born, he was born 2 days too early.
2 days too old? He's 2 days too old to be on the U17 team?
Exactly, yeah. He was born like December 30th, and he needed to have been born January 1st to be eligible for this U17 team. So even if they wanted to play him in the academy, he can't. He's too old for the academy. Unless we magically form a U19 team, which is not going to happen.
We've not talked about it at all. Sure, it'd be nice to have like a USL side at this point.
Right, yeah. And so I'm curious if they'll maybe try to sign him to a first team contract and then loan him out next year, or if he'll just go off somewhere else. I think Atlanta has his homegrown rights, and so and his older brother is in the first team in Atlanta. Tyler Wolff is in the first team in Atlanta, so maybe he would go back to Atlanta and be a homegrown player there. I don't know. I would honestly like to see him stick around long enough to get onto the first team, because I think he's going to be a good player. But I'm just very curious to see what happens with him. So on the way to this game, I was a little bit nervous, and I think mainly this is due to circumstance. So we pulled into Oscar Blues, and as we pulled into that parking lot, the whole parking lot is filled with people in Tigres jerseys. We walk into the bar, it's almost all Tigres jerseys in there. And I was like, oh my God, is this going to only be Tigres fans at this game? We get into the game and it's not the case. I think we just happened to go to the place where a lot of the Tigres fans were meeting before the game. I think it ended up probably being, would you guess like a few thousand, like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 Tigres jerseys, just looking at jerseys in the stadium?
Like, I would have guessed like 20%, which I think is probably about what that works out to. So yeah, you were at the place where the official fan club was at, and where they did their, didn't they do a march? They did like a march or something from there too.
Yeah, I think I must have missed that. I didn't see the march, but there were a lot of people in Tigres jerseys there. I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I severely underestimated how many Austin FC jerseys are going to be in this stadium tonight, but ended up not being that much. But one thing that I really noticed and really liked was a lot of the families that I saw both at Oscar Blues and in the stadium, like in line in the concourse. There's a lot of like mixed families where like the father would be wearing a Tigres shirt and his son would have an Austin FC shirt on, or Like I saw a girl wearing a Tigres jersey and an Austin FC hat. And so I think in that way, it really was kind of just like a celebration of the game in that like, this is my old team or like my main team in Tigres, like this team that I've followed for a long time. But now there's a team in my hometown and I support that as well. And that seemed to be the case for a lot of these people who are at the game, right?
Yeah, and so you really felt like it lived up to the spirit of the match, right? It was supposed to be. I mean, there's a reason it's a literal international friendly, I think.
Yeah. So as far as like takeaways from the game, I thought that was just like, I don't know, it was like a little bit heartwarming just to see like, oh, this is like the beauty of soccer, right? Like bridging borders and kind of this generational gap as well, where these families with some members wearing different jerseys but all going to the game together. As far like I said before, I don't think we learned much from this game from a soccer perspective, but overall I think this game did its job. Austin got to show off its stadium and the fan atmosphere to Liga MX's audience who maybe wouldn't have been paying attention before. And the atmosphere was pretty good, right? So I think check. They did a good job there. Tigres got to come to the US, do a little tour, further promote their brand in the US, and probably take home a decent chunk of American change with them when they went back to Mexico. So check. Did well there. Both teams got to give some young guys some minutes who maybe needed some minutes but weren't quite ready for playing for the first team. Check. Both teams got to do that. So overall, I thought it was a success. I think the game was fun. The atmosphere in the stadium was fun. So I think overall it was a success and did what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, I didn't go because we were out of town, so I watched it. Actually, ended up watching it twice on replay, and it was the game environment was definitely a lot better than I was afraid of. Like, it was loud. Everybody was loud at the right moments, and you could hear the chants. The crowd went crazy when Rodney scored. I mean, I thought it was a good, positive environment. I don't think there was a lot of trouble in the stands or anything like that. Like, it just seemed like a good old summer Tuesday night with soccer. And that's a really good point you made about sort of the family thing, because like that's not an experience either of us have, right? Like, I didn't grow up watching a sport or a league,
right,
at all, and so you got to respect people's roots and sort of their family and what they've grown up with. So it was good to see overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we cut to that interview with Jeremiah Oshan now, Jeremiah?
Yeah, let's do that.
Jeremiah?
Let's preview the Seattle match, and then we can come back and talk a little bit more about other Austin news and sort of expectations going forward.
All right, sounds good. We'll be back in one moment. Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by our friends at FVF Law, the official injury lawyers of Austin FC.
FVF is a different kind of personal injury law firm dedicated to community, transparency, and client education.
You can go to fvf.law to find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm and why understanding your legal options can dramatically change the outcome of a case. Once again, that's fvf.law. All right, we are joined by Jeremiah Oshan, who is the editor for Sounder at Heart. Jeremiah, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. The only way I know Moon Tower is from Dazed and Confused. So yeah. I'm excited that, and I guess, and that is an Austin story, right?
Yeah, it's a real thing where these, I think it's kind of got like a dark history, the origins of it, but it's kind of this weird old relic of like old school Austin that's still around. There's still a few of them in the city. So nice. It gets referenced in various business names, and then a lot of people outside of Austin know it from Dazed and Confused. So we thought it would be a good little moniker to throw on our podcast.
Well, I approve.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I guess, you hit just the origin story of the show, because we've got McConaughey and we've got Austin and we've got soccer. So nothing sums it up like Moon Tower.
There you go.
All right. So Jeremiah, tell us a little bit about the history of the club. I think people who pay attention to MLS will know quite a bit about the Sounders over the last few years, but what is kind of the overall story from the beginning of the Sounders?
So, it's funny, outside of Seattle, this seems to be somewhat controversial, but we do trace our history back to 1974 in the NASL. And what's funny about that, and which I think gives us a little bit of clarity in doing that is that there are genuine connections back to that team. It's not just the name. It's, there's, the owner of the team, Adrian Hanauer, was a fan of that team, but even beyond that, Brian Schmetzer played for the old Sounders. They continue to have a lot of players that were involved with those old teams that are involved in the organization now, and you can really trace a through line all the way from those days of 1974. Actually, a guy named Jimmy Gabriel was someone who was a real embodiment of that. He was on that original team. He ended up actually being a player coach for the NASL Sounders. He was involved in bringing the Sounders back the first time in 1994, 93, 94. And when they were in the A-League / USL. And then he was involved with the team kind of on the periphery, but was involved in the team all the way through MLS. And you can kind of do that with a lot of figures, maybe not quite that cleanly of a through line, but you can draw a lot of connections back to those old 1974 original Sounders. Brian Schmetzer not only played for the outdoor Sounders, but he played for the indoor Sounders, and was really influential in making sure that there was soccer continuously from all the way from the folding of the NASL, I think in or the team in 83, and they had various iterations of teams, and then they really were reborn in 94 with the A-League. They actually won 2 titles during those pre-MLS years, those brief pre-MLS years, and they continue to be a reasonably successful, if not highly attended, team in the USL. And they actually have a lot of connections still to those USL teams. There's coaches that, Tom Jucha, who's the Sounders goalkeeper coach, was actually played for those USL teams. Like Zach Scott was probably the most famous of the MLS Sounders to make it through, but they had a bunch of players that came through there. And I bring all this up because there is this real culture that the Sounders have really embraced, especially under Brian Schmetzer. And it's, this idea that they aren't just a collection of, mercenaries who show up and play soccer on the weekend, but that they are embedded in the community. And there are quite a few players that come back here after their playing days, even if they didn't retire here, either as coaches or frankly, just to be part of the community. I mean, you can kind of look around and it's amazing how many of the local academies have former Sounders either running them or coaching for them. Another recent example is a guy named Wade Weber, who is the Tacoma Defiance coach. He never played for the Sounders in the NASL days, but he did play for them in the A-League, and he came to MLS. He was a guy from Federal Way. He actually was an advanced history teacher, and then he got into coaching, and he was running academies, and now he's at the Defiance. And you can kind of find a lot of examples like that. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's made following the Sounders a lot of fun, is that there is this real sense of culture and history that feels a little bit more than a crest or a color or whatever it is. And so it's been fun getting to learn about that. I myself am a Seattle import. I moved here in 2009 and sort of kind of learned all this stuff on the fly, but it's been fun.
Yeah, a more recent player who kind of spanned different generations is Freddie Montero, who recently came back. He is the all-time leading scorer for the organization. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great example. Here's a guy who came to MLS in 2009 as like kind of this up and coming Colombian player who was open about his dreams of playing in Europe. He played here for 4 seasons. He ends up kind of wanting to try his luck in Europe, even though he wasn't necessarily at the height of things weren't going all the way he wanted to go. So he ended up going on a short loan back to Colombia. Then he was able to get a loan to Sporting CP in Portugal, and he actually ended up having a pretty nice little career in Portugal. And then he played in China, and then he came back to MLS. But he had maintained a home in the Seattle area. He ended up marrying a Seattle woman, had children with them, so he had this connection here. And then in this last preseason, he so badly wanted to come back and play and kind of play his last few years with the Sounders that he apparently agreed to take a league minimum contract. It's kind of surreal. We thought that was a typo when it came out, but I've been assured that he is in fact on a like $82,000 salary, and this is a guy who was a designated player last year, making $1.3 million, and he wanted to come home essentially, and this is what he considered home. So he was the all-time leading scorer for the Sounders. He had just barely held on to that. Clint Dempsey on his last kick of a soccer ball for the Sounders actually hit a ball off the post from midfield that left him tied on all-time goals with Freddie Montero. And now Raul Ruidiaz is breathing down his neck though, and it looks like he may even pass him this year. But it's been, Freddie Montero has been kind of a nice surprise. He's not been starting all the time, but he has made some starts, and you can definitely see elements that, like, he's one of those players that if you can get him in a good time, he can put in a solid shift. I don't think the Sounders are going to rely on him to score 10 goals, but he might end up with 10 combined goals and assists, and that would be pretty good for a guy who's on a minimum salary.
Yeah, so it's not technically the same organization all the way through, but as you mentioned, lots of through lines, and Brian Schmetzer being one of them. I heard an interview with him a few years back, and I didn't realize that he had such a long history with the Sounders and with Seattle soccer, but he's very highly respected in Seattle and throughout MLS. I feel like, at least now. I think maybe a lot of people underestimated him for a while, but he's clearly built a really good culture there in Seattle. I think coming into this season, expectations were not super high for Seattle. I think with missing Jordan Morris, with Nico Lodero coming into the season with injury, with some other guys maybe missing, I think the general consensus was Seattle is probably not going to be great to start the season, but they're Seattle. They'll bring in a few key pieces, and they're going to be really good by the end of the season, and they'll be playoff contenders for sure, and probably make a deep run in the playoffs. But that's not what happened. Seattle's been really good from the start. So how has this team been able to be so good with so many key players missing?
That is a great question, and I'll add that even among Sounders fans, I think there was a lot of skepticism about this season, because they're just, you look at on paper, there were a lot of glaring holes. They let go of 3 highly influential veterans last year. They were missing Freddie Montero. They were missing Jordan Morris. They didn't replace them with real obvious replacements. Freddie Montero, there were questions about how much he had left in the tank. Kellen Rowe, another local kid coming home, and there was a lot of questions about what he really had left. And it's all kind of come together. And I think Montero and Rowe, and then the other guy that they signed in the offseason is a guy named Spencer Ritchie, who's a goalkeeper, who's another local kid. And he's not someone that was expected to have a huge influence, but I think all 3 of them sort of fit into a theme of bringing guys in who understood the culture, who understand the region, who wanted to play for the badge, so to speak. And I think that speaks to the culture of what Brian Schmetzer has created. And he's really created this idea that, like, it's not okay to have a down season. It's not okay. It shouldn't be acceptable for us to just kind of get by around the playoff line and then make a run at the end of the year. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard. And I think, there are some tactical shifts that they've made. It's not all, rainbow. It's not all like fairy dust and rainbows. There's some meat there, but I do think that part of it is sort of this ethos that he's just kind of got everyone to buy into, that there's no such thing as woe is us. They had 13 first team players that were eligible for this last game, and they went in, he doesn't sit there and say like, 1-0 loss was a good effort. He wanted 3 points from the Minnesota game. He was disappointed, and the attitude is, we have a game on Thursday and we got to figure out how to win that one too. It's not just lick our wounds and try to keep it together. It's like, how do we, continue on this run? So I think a lot of the credit has to go to Brian Schmetzer and sort of the ethos. But I also think that there was this understanding of, but maybe I think in some ways the roster forced him to think differently about how to use them tactically. And they really did lean into this idea of like, what's the best formation for the personnel that we have. And I think they saw the 3 center back formation as being sort of a nice bedrock for being able to exploit the strengths that they still had in the middle of the field. And they've really done that. They've allowed, João Paulo to dictate the game a lot They lean really heavily on Jamar Gomez Andrade on one side. They were really leaning into Nuhu on the left, and then and then just sort of, they saw Alex Roldan was probably a useful as a wing back, although he's looked great as all over the place for El Salvador, which I think is kind of speaks to the confidence that he's gained. Brad Smith has been a pretty decent left wing back, and Raul Rui Diaz is still a great forward. So, I think they just kind of leaned into their strengths, and I think that sometimes a lot of coaches just overthink, like they get in their head a little bit about, they forget that the whole point of this is to get the most out of your players. It's not to like impress someone on film.
Well, so I want to ask about you mentioned the 13 players healthy, and this game coming up on Thursday. Like, what changes do you expect to see? Are there people coming back? Do you have any idea who's going to be back? Like, what is the Sounders lineup going to look like?
Yeah, so Javier Arriaga got a yellow card, so he's out on accumulation for this game. So they may actually only have 12. Now they're going to end up signing, like for this last game, they signed 2 players on hardship, extreme hardship deals or whatever, which are 4-day contracts that they're able to bring in some Tacoma Defiance players. So this last game, they brought in 2 guys. They might end up bringing in 3, I suppose, for this next one. But their bench this last game was the most experienced MLS outfield player in this game was Josh Atencio, and this is a guy who has 300 MLS minutes, maybe less than 300 MLS minutes. And it was a bunch of teenagers, and then this guy Sam Adeniran, who is actually from Houston and had never played in MLS before, but he'd been playing kind of in like lower leagues in Europe and is on the Defiance. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Nuhu there's a chance he comes back for this game, but honestly, I'm not expecting him back. It would be kind of a, unless he was really close to traveling and they just decided that it was better to use that spot on a hardship signing. Maybe that was how it broke down, but they didn't sound super enthusiastic about the possibility of him coming. I suspect that if there's any doubt that they'll just hold him out for the weekend game against Sporting Kansas City. So yeah, they may only have 12 healthy outfield players on the first team, and then they may have to fill out the roster with some Tacoma Defiance players, which will be very interesting because if they stick with the 3-back formation, they would basically be forced to do something like play Josh Atencio there. And Atencio did play some center back in 2019 when he was with the Defiance. But the reason he's not playing center back anymore is because they didn't think that was a particularly good position for him. So it will be interesting to see what they do here.
So you mentioned some of the key players before. One of them being João Paulo, who's a player that I absolutely love. I really like watching that guy play. Are there any players that need to step up, or that like Austin fans should keep an eye on for this game coming up?
Well, I'll tell you, if for no other reason than he's going to end up starting because he has to. Danny Leyva he's an 18-year-old kid who a couple years ago he got a bunch of starts, and it was a kind of a big deal that the 16-year-old was getting starts for a team that considered themselves an MLS Cup contender. Although at the time when he was getting those starts, the Sounders weren't really playing well. But he's not really flashy. He completes a lot of passes. He doesn't necessarily do a ton defensively, but he's good at, closing down passing lanes and that kind of thing. But that's one player that it may be worth watching just because it's interesting to view from him being an 18-year-old, and he's going to be starting for a Supporters Shield leading team. Josh Atencio, similarly, I imagine he'll end up having to start too. And yeah, I guess the other one that might be worth watching, and this is the reason I like him. I've really fallen in love this year with Jimmy Medranda. He's a player who your listeners may know because he had a kind of like star turn at Sporting Kansas City 3 or 4 years ago, and then he got hurt and he's been struggling with injuries, and he really hadn't played for basically 2 years. And the Sounders got him in a trade he was seen really as sort of a make weight when they traded Handwall Bwana, who was a homegrown player, to Nashville. And they also got Jimmy Medranda in a bunch of allocation money. And Medranda was really not seen as a key component of this trade. And, here we are a year later, and it looks like Medranda may actually be the single best element that was traded in that transaction. And he's a high energy player. He gets up and down the line. He's not necessarily fast, but he's really solid technically. And and he's someone who can score a goal if given a chance. But he's someone that I would keep an eye on for sure if I'm a Austin FC fan.
So going into this game on Thursday, Austin FC also has a very thin roster right now, partly because it's an expansion team, but I think we've got 6 long-term injuries, and in this friendly we played against Tigres last week, 3 or 4 other guys sat, and we ended up playing 16-year-old Owen Wolff, who's actually not even on the roster, against them. So I think Seattle might be the only team in MLS who has more players out than Austin right now. What do you see in this game? Like, what are you expecting to see? Or is there anything that Austin does that you think could potentially give Seattle trouble in this game?
I mean, I think Austin gave the Sounders plenty of trouble in the first meeting, and that was in Seattle. So I would not be at all surprised to see Austin, come out and maybe even dominate possession. I know you guys are much more, at times you guys put on a really good show. You just, whooped Portland, which we were very familiar, which we were watching with glee, I suppose. Which, yes, we are petty like that. And but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Austin come out and sort of dominate possession. And the Sounders have not, even at their best this year, they haven't really had a ton of possession. Actually, weirdly, against Austin was one of their highest possession games, but they didn't create a whole lot of danger in that one.
I think that was the first game that Austin didn't win the possession battle, and might have been the first one that the Sounders won the possession battle. Yeah, it was kind of not what we expected in that one, although the Sounders did kind of come in with the idea that they were going to dominate possession in that game, partly because they were really frustrated with the previous game against Atlanta where they felt like they got pinned back too much. But yeah, it'll be an interesting one for sure. I think that the matchup between, I assume Brad Ring is playing, but the matchup between him and João Paulo, I think, is fascinating. Yeah, for sure. They're very different players of the same position,
right? And they're going to end up occupying a lot of the same space, I imagine.
Yeah. So that's a good thing to watch out for. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in this one. Austin will likely be missing some attacking talent, which means we may have to start Kekuta Mane again, which he's had some success against the Sounders. I don't know if you know that, but he's like an inordinate percentage of his goals. That's good to know. I did not know that, but yeah, I have not been the biggest Kekuta Mane fan this year and don't really look forward to games where he has to start, but I'd rather have Gallagher in there, but I'm not sure he's going to be back yet. But yeah, hopefully it's better than a 0-0 draw again. But it's going to be an interesting matchup, mainly because of all the players missing for both sides. But good luck to you guys. Not too much, but yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Jeremiah. This was great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what Austin looks like, at least on TV. One of these days, I hope to get out there and see a game. Fingers crossed that'll be possible sooner than later. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it will be fun. Seems like you guys put on a great show over there, and it'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, let us know if you ever make it, and we'll be happy to buy a beer.
Oh yes, well there you go. That seals the deal for me. But no, but seriously, thanks for having me on, and you guys do great work. I appreciate it.
I ain't got no time to let you pass. I only got one life, and it's gone too fast. So I'll get
All right, we want to thank Jeremiah Oshan one more time for joining us. He's if y'all aren't familiar with Jeremiah, he's one of the guys covering the Sounders, has been doing it for quite a while. And so if you want to find any other information about the Sounders, it's definitely a good spot to go. Let's jump into some other Austin FC news, Jeremiah Bentley, my Jeremiah. So Eric Goodman wrote an article in Austin Chronicle recently asking if the honeymoon phase at Austin FC is ending. So why don't you read this quote here that you have written?
Yeah, I think the money quote out of this said, so far the atmosphere at Q2 has been electric regardless of the outcome on the pitch. The club supporters have flat out brought it for all 90 minutes each time out, and players and coaches, both home and visiting, have been blown away. But those fans cannot and should not be expected to remain this engaged if the team shows it can't hang at an MLS level. The honeymoon phase is coming to an end, and it's time for the Oaks to start sprouting some W-shaped roots in this city. And I thought that was interesting opinion to have. What was your original take on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think we were kind of discussing this before we started recording, and you mentioned that there are probably two different camps in this, right? Like two different sets of responses you're going to get. And the folks over in the supporters section, they're going to be there no matter what this season, and probably no matter what next season. But what about the rest of the stadium, the people who aren't over in the South End? Do you think this is accurate for the other 18,000 or however many it is?
Yeah, I think that's what made this article interesting to me, is like our friends and the people that we talk to on Twitter all the time are the people in the supporters section who thought this was like an absurd, take. And I think some of them even might have called Eric out on it, on Twitter, and he responded too, which was good. But I mean, I think there's some credibility to that. Austin's blessed to have this giant wait list, but there's an article in Austonia this week about how Q2 Stadium is the biggest party in Austin. And I think that, if we finish 11th or 12th this year, don't score many goals, and don't show a lot of progress in the offseason, I can see some of those people that are kind of the folks that just come for the party and come for the good time, come because it's the thing to see and be seen. I can see some flagging in that support, and some of those, I don't think that Austin's in danger of not selling out every match, but I can see next July on a Wednesday night, if we're in 10th place, like not everybody being there. A lot of people passing on their seats because there's some other fun, interesting thing to do in town.
Yeah, I think that's totally accurate. I think one thing going in Austin's favor is, and I've said this for a while now, is that if Austin FC can create a good atmosphere, you mentioned the biggest party in town, if they can create a fun atmosphere that people like coming to, regardless of if we win the game or not, if it's just fun in there, I think people will come back. If it's just absolutely terrible soccer time after time after time, it's gonna decline a little. But I think part of what makes it a party atmosphere is the supporter section, right? And so if you have that dedicated aspect of the field, even if there are parts of the rest of the stadium who might start losing interest, that party atmosphere will be there as long as the supporter section is bringing it, which is not the case at all MLS teams, right? And so I think there's a slight advantage there, but I think the team needs to at least be competitive, or needs to consistently make or flirt with the playoffs for these first few years to keep that interest high. Otherwise, it will start declining for sure.
Yeah, another part of that too, I think, is if we were losing these games 5-3 and 4-2 and 4-3, it would be very different than 70% of our goals coming in the Denver and Portland matches.
Right.
I think that's.
Yeah, Austin's not been blown out really yet, right? So I was reading Phil West's recap of the Tigres game. That's the first time a team has scored 3 goals on us.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think every other, like the most we've given up is 2 in any other game, which is crazy to think about. So one thing that Austin needs to do to make sure they don't lose every game and start losing attendance is they need to sign some more players to be able to score those goals. We haven't really heard many rumors lately, right? Like the window's open. We got the Djitté signing, but since then it's kind of been crickets. One thing that I don't think this is ever a possibility, and we can talk about that, but Joseph Martinez was kind of in an argument with their manager Gabriel Heinze. Heinze has now been fired, so maybe Joseph will end up sticking around for a few years. But I saw some people saying, maybe half joking, but definitely saying like we should get Joseph Martinez. Is that even possible?
I don't, that kind of in league transfer. Like I don't
like
I can't think.
Not even like on the like, oh, that'll never happen. But like literally, like, is it possible to make a transfer of that stature within MLS?
Right, because when Atlanta signed Joseph Martinez, he wasn't Joseph Martinez, basically, right?
And they also brought him in from out of the league, and so
yes,
you don't see stars moving within MLS unless they're like a little bit older and they're moving to a team to. It's like Walker Zimmerman is a huge move within MLS. Alex Ring is a big move within MLS. But Joseph Martinez is on a different level from those guys. And just like taking into account the amount of GAM or the kinds of players you would have to trade to make that happen, I don't see it happening. And maybe that would be the only way it would happen, if you were throwing players into the mix and saying like, okay, we're going to give you our whole starting front line plus 5 million in GAM, which I don't think we have that much, but like it would have to be something outrageous like that that's never happened in the league before. And so I don't think Joseph is going to go to another MLS team if he does leave Atlanta, but I also just don't think it's even possible for that to happen.
Yeah, the biggest deal that I can think of, and I just looked it up, and it's nowhere close to that, was Darlington Nagbe going from Atlanta to Columbus.
That was like $1 million, I think.
Of course, it's 3 different types of numbers, but it's a little over $1 million and an international roster spot. And it's the only DP that I can think of that's even moved within the league that comes out the top of my mind. So, yeah, that's probably unlikely and impossible.
Yeah. So we mentioned the one signing we have made in this window, Moussa Djitté. So Jeremiah and I earlier tonight, we're recording this on Monday night. Earlier tonight, we went on Soccer Matters with Glenn Davis, his radio show, and Aiden Stanley was on just before us. And so we called into the line and we're listening on the phone to Aiden Stanley's interview. And Glenn asks Aiden Stanley about Moussa Djitté and if he's in town yet. And Aiden gives like a non-answer answer saying like, oh, well, like I'm not sure if I'm allowed to answer that or something like that, which I read that as like Djitté's in town, right?
Yeah, that's what that took to mean that too. I feel like if you could have seen him, Aiden Stanley's probably staring off somewhere looking for permission to answer or not answer. But yeah, the way he kind of clammed up, and I appreciate that Glenn realized he had pushed it as far as he should, and just kind of like shut it down too.
Glenn backed off. He didn't want to put pressure, and so we of course stepped in and put that pressure right back on. Right. Sorry, Aiden Stanley.
So we believe that Aiden Stanley has seen Moussa Djitté in training and just didn't want to be the person to break that news.
Yeah, so that's a good signing. A good sign. I was getting a little bit worried. I mean, we've said this before. We need to kind of temper expectations and give Djitté some time to settle in. We shouldn't expect him to slot in. And honestly, if he's getting in town this late, I don't think we could even expect him to start this game against Seattle. But now that he's here, if he's here, it's Monday now. If he even got here yesterday, trains a few days, we could maybe see him come off the bench in that game. So I think that's a really good sign. Hopefully we will get to see him get his first minutes. And just from a depth perspective, I think we're going to be missing Gallagher might still be out. Pereira might still be out. And so we're going to be pretty thin again. We're going to need some more players. And so even if he can give us 15, 20 minutes at the end of the game, that's awesome. And it would be very useful for Josh Wolff right now.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to get caught on health is that Josh Wolff's press conference is at 1:15 tomorrow, which is right after this comes out, which is when maybe we'll have some of that information. So I guess maybe one of us should probably attend and tweet it out so we can have a written addendum to whatever we say here.
Yeah, for sure. We'll almost definitely get some news about some of those things, hopefully all of them. One other little thing that we've kind of been meaning to talk about over the last few shows and kept running out of time, but Austin Q2 Stadium seemed to be having some issues with the turf. And so in the opening game of Q2 Stadium, which was the women's national team, there were some issues happening. The first Austin game, there were some issues. And then for the second game, you saw there were some stretches of the pitch that had actually been replaced before the game against Columbus. And still some pretty big divots being made. I think you're the one who I heard saying this first, Jeremiah, but this grass was made for drought climates, right? And so hot summer, drought climate, this is the grass for Austin, but then it rained for a month straight. And so do we think that's what caused the turf to be in such bad shape?
I feel like that has to be one of the factors that it was. I mean, the grass is also being used in Qatar for the World Cup, right? And so it's not necessarily set up for the wettest May in Austin history. And I thought maybe it resolved a little bit because I felt like against LA, it fared fine.
Yeah,
better than before.
Still like a little soft. There were some divots, but it was in I don't think it was hindering play necessarily. There weren't chunks coming up. There's like in that first game, they're like literally like it looked like carpet sliding up off of the ground underneath it, and that wasn't happening anymore. So still a little bit soft, but I thought it was still playing quite well against LAFC. So I thought maybe it was like, okay, maybe they're making a turn, but Weston Applefeller didn't think so, because last week they ripped up the whole thing and laid down entirely new sod. And so have we seen the information about whether or not it's the same kind of grass, or did they put something else in?
So I haven't seen even. We've seen the pictures on Reddit and then in Slack of the sand, but I haven't actually seen pictures of the sod back down. So I mean, I'm assuming it's back down. I saw some rolls. There was somebody posted a picture of like a truck with a bunch of rolls of sod on it.
Yeah.
So I would think it would have to be the same. I mean, they made this decision based upon long-term conditions and climate, and I have to think they wouldn't just bail out on that choice, this quickly after a few matches. So they must have trucked some more in from Arizona or wherever, and they're giving it another go. So we'll see on Thursday how that plays out.
Yeah. Hopefully it beds in well enough to play on Thursday. Some other interesting news that came out last week was it Sportico? Is that the publication that released these?
I don't remember which one it was.
I think it was called
one of these sports business.
Sportico, but like a sports business publication. But they came out with MLS team valuations, and Austin FC was ranked 10th in this list. Was it like 500 some odd million was the Austin valuation there?
Yep, that was. It was huge, and especially when you think about MLS valuations compared to some other big clubs around the world, which is probably a topic we don't have time to get into, but MLS clubs are very, very valuable, largely because of the closed system, I think, and also because of the I guess for Austin it has to be because it's not only the club, it's the club and the stadium.
Yeah,
right.
I think the newer facilities has a lot to do with it, and then also just the upside of the business. Like if you buy a Premier League team, you're not going to make much more money than you already are. But buying an MLS team, you expect in the years to come, this will be a much more lucrative business to be in. And so I think that's part of it as well. There's a lot of people on Twitter saying that these numbers are inflated. These aren't real numbers. Don't read too much into this. Do you think that's true? Like, are these numbers legitimate?
They seem legitimate to me. I mean, if you think about the fact that there's a $200 and whatever $million stadium, a $50 million training facility, and then you can assume that the team's worth at least what an expansion fee is. Then I mean, that's a whole bunch right there. I mean, that's what $600 million just among those three things in value. So I can believe that Austin's worth that. Yeah,
and it's one of these things where it's not like you can go to the store, like go to a handful of stores and see like how much is an MLS team running these days. Like it's not part of the basket of goods or whatever that like economists calculate. It's a one-time thing, and it's worth whatever someone will pay for it. And so I don't know what this total ended up being, or if we'll ever know what the actual number was, but I think Orlando City just got sold, and I think that was supposed to be somewhere between 400 and 450 million.
Same for Houston. Houston was about 400 too.
Yeah. So in the Houston's, you don't even get to own the stadium with that. The stadium belongs to the county. And so you would have to guess, if Houston is being sold for that much money, then like maybe Austin is worth 530 or 550 or whatever it is. And maybe LAFC is worth 800 million or whatever. Like in the end, I don't think these numbers matter that much. It's all kind of made up, but yeah, it's worth what one billionaire is willing to pay for it. And so, if nothing else, I think we can look at it and say that people who are evaluating these clubs, it'll at least be like within the context of the league. And so even if Austin FC is not worth 550 million, it is still seen as one of the top 10 most valuable clubs in the league. And so I think that goes to just kind of the asset that is the city of Austin, that stadium, and the team that's been built so far, it doesn't really mean anything on the pitch. It doesn't mean anything to a fan. It's more of like bragging rights, kind of. Like, I don't know that we get anything out of that, right? Like, it's just to say, like, we're more important than 20 other teams.
It's better to be that than to be 25th or 23rd or whatever, right?
All right. One other thing we wanted to mention is All-Star voting is happening now. And I think when this comes out, there'll be 1 or 2 more days left in All-Star voting. So we need you to go and vote and get Bradley Stuver in this All-Star team. It has to happen. It has to happen. And so voting, I think you're technically allowed to vote once per day. Some unscrupulous individuals might go online and find that if you do it in an incognito browser, that it lets you vote unlimited times. We're not recommending you do that, and I myself would never do that. Jeremiah would never do that. He's a respectable man. So we would never do that. We would not recommend you do that. But if there are some, I could see some people who have
deep love for Bradley in their hearts
and no morals
and no regard for the rules. Yeah.
Then you could go into incognito and vote on as many times as you want for Bradley Stuver.
Yep. And you only need to do it until 2 a.m. on Thursday the 22nd is actually when it closes, because it closes at 11:59 Pacific time.
Yeah. So the way this works is there's going to be, like, I think a third of the team is fan votes, a third is media votes, and then I think, like, is it players? I think players.
Yeah, current players
get a vote. So I think there's a decent chance Stuver gets into the team. Is there anybody else from this team that A, you think deserves it, and B, actually has a chance of getting into the team?
Well, I think Alex Ring might possibly deserve it, and I think if anybody else, he's got the best chance just because he's the most well-known name on a league-wide basis. And so for those people that are voting, like, I may have voted a bunch of times for 10 Austin players and Carlos Vela because I could not put I just couldn't bring myself to put Rodney Redis
or Kakuta Mane
on the All-Star team. So I had to, like, have like 1 ounce of soul. So I can see some other people doing that and maybe picking Ring. How about what do you think? Do you have a guy?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think Ring is the only one with a shot. I don't know that he'll end up making it. One thing that maybe gives him a better shot is Gianluca Busio is rumored to be on the verge of a move to Italy. And so he's one of the guys that, like, might get that central midfield spot in the All-Star team. If he leaves, maybe Ring is one of the guys that slots into that. I think if he has, actually voting is going to be over the fan voting, but there's still the other, like the media vote and the player vote, I think will still go on after that. So I think if he has a strong few games between now and then, Alex Ring definitely has a chance to be in that team. All right. Anything else before we wrap up, Jeremiah?
No, I feel like we've covered about everything there is to talk about this week.
All right. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We've been meeting just like at the games, at soccer events, meeting lots of people who listen to the show that we've never gotten to meet in person before. And that's been a lot of fun. I got to meet, Samuel Mintz, who is Samuel Mintz Amateur Dumbass on Twitter.
He's got the best Twitter name.
Good follow there. I met a guy named David at the event we did with Adrian Healy a few weeks ago. So it's really great after this year and a half of being trapped in our homes to get to go out and listen, or go out and meet the people who have been listening to the podcast. So that's been a lot of fun. So if you know someone you think you might enjoy it, let them know about it. Tell them to subscribe. Tell them to check out an episode. If you want to continue the soccer conversation, you can find us on Twitter at LViajero87 and at jbentley_ATX. And then we're also on Instagram and Twitter at Moontower Soccer. Jeremiah, is there any articles from the Striker Texas that people should check out this week?
Well, our friend Phil West wrote an article dedicated to the Austin FC fan Facebook group. And I would never recommend that anybody spend too much time on the Facebook group itself. And I think, Landon, you said, like, you're only going to read Phil articles about it. And
Phil was like texting us, referencing things he read in there. I was like, Phil, if you want me to read it, you're going to have to write another story about it, because that's the only way I'm dipping in there. But I was going to
say, Phil's story was good. And it was, a lot of it was around the debate about other countries and opposing colors in the supporters section, which we can talk about over a beer sometime, because there's a whole lot to unpack, and Facebook brings out the worst in all of us. But Phil's article is interesting for sure and worth a read.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in 1 week with a new episode of Moon Tower Soccer, where we will cover the latest in Austin FC news, and we'll also recap the Seattle Sounders match. Until then, I'm Landon Cottom.
I'm Jeremiah Bentley.
We'll catch you next time.
No one is around.